Okay, streaming on Twitch. Okay, streaming on everything. By the way, I think I should probably stream portrait and landscape to YouTube. Mm, and so then, what should I drop? Twitch or Kick? I have gotten one person on Kick. I don't know whether they subscribed, but seen them on two separate live streams, so that's cool. So I guess we'll drop Twitch. Um, yeah. Okay, excellent. So, let me open up the chat. Start this over here. And this over here. Great. Start this. Alright. Beep beep. Ooh, yikes. Don't spill the coffee on the phones, please. Okay, excellent. So we're looking at immersion. Um, Losing Ourselves by Jay Garfield, whom we are interviewing on Wednesday, the 28th, Thursday, the 29th, and on his clock. Okay. So we're into chapter 6. So we started with the definition of the self, the target of our attack. Jay Garfield and I don't believe that there is a self as we see ourselves. So, chapter 1, who do you think you are, what a self is, and why you think you have one? Um, and he kind of showed that with some thought experiments. He didn't like explain the underlying, why that illusion evolved, what its advantages were, but he has mentioned them a few times about social identity and so on. But that is not his objective here, to explain why you think you have one. And then he explained why actually you don't have one. So gave us some glimpses from Buddhism, philosophy, and neuroscience. And then he was like, so since self we take to be X, Y, and Z, and since those things aren't real, let's use the word persons to describe what we actually are. And we are roles that our psychophysical processes, our embodiment, our relationships, all play or produce or, yeah, instantiate. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair way to describe it, and I definitely agree with it. So that's what you really are, discovering the person. All right, but now then we were like, all right, well, let's look at what are the contemporary philosophical arguments for the self, and they ain't shit. So especially those who were trying to suggest that that there's some way to reason to the truth of an outside of space-time singular substantial continuous in a diachronic and synchronic way self, or complete, or yeah, singular or unified in a diachronic and synchronic way self. Synchronic being that um, you have like either all the parts that make up the self are consistent, like boom, and if you change one of those parts you no longer have the same self. And then diachronic in the sense of that this timeline of these instantiations of the self can be considered all the same instantiation or the same identity. Um, so the transcendent self, this self that stands behind and possesses and is outside of the mind and so on, trash. And then some philosophers are like, okay, fine, no transcendent self. But there is still like just like a watered down version of the transcendent self that can be established through reason, that can be established as a reality through reasoning. And Jay Garfield is like, no, bro. Pretty much the same problems with the minimal self as there were with the transcendent self. Okay, so now immersion, and we're going to read the last paragraph of chapter 5, and see and let that lead us into chapter 6. Yeah, all right, that's good. Okay. Um, I'll read the last two paragraphs. Tsongkapa's advice. Tsongkapa's advice is that only long-term meditative exercise is capable of ridding us of the innate sense of self. It is too wired into our psyche to be extirpated just by doing philosophy. This is indeed one of the reasons that meditative practice is so important in Buddhist traditions. It is a vehicle through which philosophy can be transformative. By allowing that philosophy to seep so deeply into our consciousness that it comes to shape our experience. Oh, thank you. I completely forgot about that. I conclude this chapter with that thought, partly so that a reader who follows the arguments against the reality of the self but still feels the pull of the opposing position can see why that might be the case. Okay, and then I was disagreeing. I was saying in the previous stream when I was reading this that I think that it's not just about, or it's not even mostly about the philosophy seeping through. It's about that through that real prolonged long-term meditative exercise, you can experience the world without experiencing the self, the subject, the awareness itself, and you're instead just experiencing the foci of the awareness, foci as Dr. Garfield says. Great. And then I was saying that that's why I think that the 2 out of the 3 authors of self-illusion books that I've read are probably, and I think are Buddhist, based on the way that they talked about Buddhism anyway. And so they probably have first person, immediate experience of the lack of first person immediate experience. Okay, so, but I also end this chapter with this reflection because I think that Tsongkhapa might have been a little too pessimistic. I agree with him that a transformation of vision is necessary to see beyond the self-illusion, but it just might be that that transformation can be achieved by closer attention to the times when that illusion is weakened or disappears. It is to those occasions that we now turn. So, Chapter 6, Immersion, Selfless Spontaneity, and Skillful Living. So far, we have been emphasizing the degree to which the illusion of self is natural and almost unavoidable. But this does not mean that we succumb to that illusion at every waking moment. There are times, perhaps, more than we realize, when we don't represent ourselves as selves at all, when we spontaneously engage with the world in ways that implicate no sense of self. And indeed, these may be the most pleasant and rewarding moments of our lives. In this chapter, I will consider those spontaneous moments of selflessness and what they suggest about who we are and about who we can aspire to become. All right, great. So that's the plan for this chapter. I will consider those spontaneous moments of selflessness and what they suggest about who we are and about who we can aspire to become. I remember Kahneman citing a number like, we have moments of like real consciousness where we're like aware of ourselves or aware of our own subjectivity, and they only last about 3 to 5 seconds. I don't remember what kind of range of frequencies people have these moments, but typically there's some research that they only last 3 to 5 seconds. So that'd be great if someone else looked that up, and then I don't mean you. Oh, she can't hear. Someone else looked. That'd be great if someone in the chat looked that up and told us about that. Let's get this collaboration going. All right, so in order to get our minds around the experience of selflessness, it is useful to recall the deep connection between the sense of self, the understanding of experience in terms of subject-object duality, and of action in terms of free agency. To take ourselves to be selves, as we saw in chapter 1, is to take ourselves to be subjects with a very different mode of existence than that we assign to our objects. So that I, the perceiver, the awarer of this apple, is fundamentally of a different kind than this apple, in the most fundamental of senses. That my existence is even incomparable to this apple. Probably has nothing in common with it, would be the idea. So it is to regard ourselves as standing against the world rather than as being embedded in it. And it is to take our self-knowledge to be immediate as opposed to the mediated knowledge we have of our objects. Each of these modes of self-awareness is an aspect of subject-object duality, of taking experience to be a relation between these two entities of entirely different kinds. Each of these modes of self-awareness is an aspect of subject-object duality, which we don't even know is true. We have no reason to think it is. It might just be how we see the world. So of taking experience to be a relation between these two entities that are of entirely different kinds. That polarity of subject and object in our experience is tantamount to the reification of a self. So to the extent that we have experiences that are non-dual in character, we are experiencing ourselves without positing a self. So we're going to read that again. To the extent that we have experiences that are non-dual in character, we are experiencing ourselves without positing a self. Okay, so when we're not having experiences where it's like, the experience is, I am a subject beholding an object. When we're not doing that, well, then we are experiencing ourselves without positing, without noticing, without paying attention, without sort of accepting or expecting a self. So we can make the same point about agency. To see ourselves as selves is to see ourselves as free agents acting upon the world, capable of agent causation that initiates actions on motives, actions whose causes lie entirely within us. No external triggers, because we're not embedded. We are independent substances, which is stupid. This is how we often make sense of the difference between action and mere behavior, and this is how we often make sense of moral and legal responsibility. So the world is going to be a changing when we come to understand ourselves as persons rather than as these free will wheeling, rational, perfectly perceiving and remembering and attending selves. Souls, what have you, whatever flippin' bullshit. Okay, so I am a little bit conscientious now about the copyright question, but I got a comment on my live stream earlier, but I talked to ChatGPT about it, so I think I'm good. I'm just glad that, I have ADHD and can't keep my mouth shut, because I always felt bad thinking, I should read like 5 pages straight and then give a few comments, but that would be leaning more towards a copyright violation. So thank God I'm a talker. Okay, so So the point that we're making ourselves, we'll read this paragraph again, we can make the same point about agency. To see ourselves as selves is to see ourselves as free agents acting upon the world, capable of agent causation that initiates actions on motives, actions that whose causes lie entirely within us. This is how we often make sense of the difference between action and mere behavior. And this is how we often make sense of moral and legal responsibility. This is how subject-object duality looks in the domain of action. In perceptual experience, the subject is divorced from the world and located as a spectator of it. By analogy, in action, the agent is divorced from the causal nexus and acts freely upon it. And so this relates, and, I want to use in our Warsaw illusion specifically the will ones, because most of these are about essence, but here we have will, thinking of ourselves as divorced from the causal nexus, or in the terms, in sensory terms, we are divorced from the world and located as a spectator of it, or in the will terms, and then acting freely upon it. All right, so, thank you, Romo. So, once again, then, to the extent that we experience ourselves as fully immersed and not as freely initiating actions directed upon objects, our agency is non-dual in character. We act without superimposing the self or the duality between self and other implicated by the sense of causally independent agency. So, a Taoist perspective. Up to this point, when drawing on Asian ideas, I have focused on those of Indian Buddhists and their interlocutors. I mean, there's a lot of stuff from Hindus. Are those the interlocutors we're talking about? Not really. But this is not the only Asian context in which we find deep reflection on the question of the reality of the self. We also find discussions of this kind of non-dual immersed awareness and agency in the Taoist, as well as in the Chan and Zen Buddhist traditions. Let us begin with a justly famous passage from the Chinese classic, the Zhuangzi, I forget. The story of Butcher Ding, a story that illustrates non-duality and selflessness both in the domain of subjectivity and in the domain of philosophy. Butcher Ding was cutting up an ox for Lord Wenhui. At every touch of his hand, every heave of his shoulder, every move of his feet, every thrust of his knee, zip zoop, he slithered the knife along with a zing, and all was in perfect rhythm, as though he were performing the dance of the Mulberry Grove, or keeping time at the Ching Show music. Keeping time to the Ching Show music. Ah, this is marvelous, said Lord Wenhui. Imagine skill reaching such heights. Imagine skill reaching such heights. I'm not going to be able to preserve the voice I was doing. Imagine skill reaching such heights. Butcher Ding laid down his knife and replied, "What I care about is the way, which goes beyond skill. When I first began cutting up oxen, all I could see was the ox itself. After 3 years, I no longer saw the whole ox, and now I go at it by spirit and don't look with my eyes. Perception and understanding have come to a stop, and spirit moves where it wants. I go along with the natural makeup, striking the big hollows, guide the knife through the big openings, and following things as they are. So I never touch the smallest ligament or tendon, much less a main joint. A good butcher changes his knife once a year because he cuts. A mediocre butcher changes his knife once a month because he hacks. I've had this knife of mine for 19 years, and I've cut up thousands of oxen with it, and yet the blade is as good as though it had just come from the grindstone. There are spaces between the joints, and the blade of the knife has really no thickness. If you insert If you insert what has no thickness into such spaces, then there's plenty of room, more than enough for the blade to play about it. That's why, after 19 years, the blade of my knife is still as good as when it first came back from as when it first came from the grindstone. However, whenever I come to a complicated place, I size up the difficulties, tell myself to watch out and be careful, keep my eyes on what I'm doing, walk very slowly, and move the knife with the greatest subtlety until flop. The whole thing comes apart like a clod of earth crumbling to the ground. I stand there holding the knife and look all around me, completely satisfied and reluctant to move on, and then I wipe off the knife and put it away. Exactly, said Lord Wenhui. I have heard the words of Butcher Ding and learned how to care for life. Okay, so exciting. So there are a few things to note in this story. First, and most obviously, it is a story about skill acquisition, expertise, and the transformation of subjectivity as one moves from novice to virtuoso status in a domain. When he begins carving oxen, the butcher sees only oxen. You know what's funny? I think I completely got lost in that story and I forgot. I don't know if I forgot me as a subject, but I definitely forgot the entire context of this book. There are a few things to note in this story. So first and most obviously, it's about skill acquisition, one moving from novice to virtuoso status. Because when he begins carving oxen, the butcher sees only oxen. This kind of perception, the kind we experience in much of our lives, presents objects to us. Inasmuch as it does, this kind of perceptual experience invites us to see ourselves as the subjects to whom those objects are presented, and to take ourselves to be distinct and removed from all of our objects of knowledge. In this mode of awareness, we experience ourselves as selves. Hold on, let me put this there. And then we can put that there. Awesome. So distinct and removed from all of our objects of knowledge. In this mode of awareness, we experience ourselves as selves. As he matures in his skill, the oxen disappear, but Butcher Ding now sees their parts. His perception at this point in his development is more sophisticated, more nuanced, but still presents subject and object as distinct, and so continues to implicate the experience of the self. When true virtuosity is achieved, though, perception and understanding have come to a stop, and Ding cuts with pure spirit. This may sound mystical, but it is not, and it should be familiar to anyone who has developed a complex perceptual motor skill set, such as a musical or an athletic skill or a skill in a martial art. These, like ox butchering, are domains in which improvisation is necessary and in which one must be able to perceive and to act with great accuracy and responsiveness to one's environment at great speed without the luxury of continuous reflection and calculation. When performing as a virtuoso, one is in what psychologists call a flow state. In such a state, one experiences one's actions as spontaneous, not as planned or calculated. One's own body, cognitive states, and the objects around one are not objects of reflective awareness, even though in these moments one is perhaps more closely perceptually attuned to the world and to one's own actions than at any other time. And yet, the objects around one are not objects of reflective awareness. There is, despite this exquisite attunement and control, no experience of subject object duality and no awareness of self. The achievement of real expertise, the Zhuangzi suggests through this parable, is in part the achievement of this kind of perceptual skill and perceptual motor attunement. In the achievement of virtuosity, if this is right, we also see the elimination of one's sense of self. Okay. There is another nice There's another nice insight we can glean from this story. While Ding and Wenhui might appear to be the only important characters, there is one more, the knife. Why is that flashing like that? Alright. There is one more, the knife, that although it hasn't been sharpened in 19 years, is still so sharp that it finds the spaces in the joints and moves through them effortlessly. Zhuangzi is reminding us here that the boundaries of our embodiment are not necessarily those of our human bodies. The tools and equipment we use become part of us as persons. We experience this all the time, and this reminds us, of course, of Andy Clark's the one who talks about predictive processing and the extended mind. Both, right? Okay. So about Andy Clark's extended mind. We experience this all the time. When we use a stick to probe a hole, we feel the hole through the stick. When we drive a car, we experience the car as an extension of our body. And feel ourselves to be in control of its movements. When we look into the rear view mirror, we see not a reflection, but what is behind us, and so on. So like we don't see that like as a reflection. It's as though we were just looking behind us rather than looking at something that is reflecting what is behind us. This reminds us of another aspect of the non-duality of our experience. We do not exist outside of our environment, perceiving it as subject, acting on it as agent. We are non-dually immersed in it, with no clear boundary between ourselves and everything else. This tale might appear to be anti-intellectual or to suggest a complete abandonment of self-awareness, but that would be to read it incorrectly. The Zhuangzi does not mean to say that in achieving spontaneity or selflessness, one gives up entirely on the ability to think and to calculate. As Ding says, whenever I come to a complicated place, I size up the difficulties, tell myself to watch out and be careful, keep my eyes on what I'm doing, walk very slowly, and move the knife with the greatest subtlety. I think that this is the most important moment in this parable, although it is easy to overlook. Careful, calculating thought can also, the Zhuangzi suggests, be spontaneous and can be conducted without positing a self. We can become absorbed in thought and solving a problem or in a complex conversation or debate just as easily as we can be absorbed in carving an ox. And what goes for butchery goes for surgery. Zhuangzi's account of the role of slowing down and the processes that govern it are confirmed in recent studies of the attentional processes of skilled surgeons. Surgical skills, like sports skills, to which we'll turn next, and highly trained expert skills in general become highly automatized as surgeons acquire expertise, and experienced surgeons can perform complex tasks while conversing or listening to music. Right? Just like driving, right? But in surgery, just as in butchery, complications sometimes arise that require the surgeon to slow down and to transfer control from automated processing to careful, attentive, cognitive control, right? Switching over from a type 1 process to a type 2 process. As Moulton and Epstein put it, the ability to make this transition appropriately in clinical practice is the hallmark of expertise. Okay, to have good type 1 mechanisms that are running, and then also have probably a type 1 mechanism that can notice when the type 1 mechanisms are not going to suffice, and can enlist the type 2 processes to jump in and assess, take in more information, do a more nuanced evaluation. And like Butcher Ding, surgeons report that the shift from one mode of control to the other, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that we talked about it as one mode of control because I hate when people talk about type 1 and type 2 processes, type 1 processes being automatic and type 2 processes being controlled. So I really like careful, attentive, because careful, unlike deliberate, doesn't connote like intention. Careful, attentive cognitive control, and automated much better than automatic. I think so. I think there's a nuance there that's super valuable. So this is really great. Automated, not automatic. I don't know. I don't know about what I'm saying about, a nuance between those two words. So this is a good characterization of type 1, type 2 processes. Because also we're referring to type 1 and type 2 are modes of control. So, and like Butcher Ding, surgeons report that the shift from one mode of control to the other is as automatic and effortless as suturing at the close of surgery. It is one more aspect of automated skill, the spontaneous deployment of higher order thought or thought directed on thought. And that gets that recursive. Oh, this is so awesome. Oh, I'm so pleased to see this, bro. I'm so pleased to see, and he's not even a neuroscientist. Maybe that's what helps, right? That he's a philosopher, and so these words and these categories matter more to him, and he's able to navigate them more easily than psychologists and neuroscientists who happily accept the illusion of self when talking about type 1, type 2 processes. This is so great. This is so great. This is so awesome. Yay, Dr. Garfield. Moreover, like Ding, also again like Ding, even when their attention is fully controlled and no longer automated. Okay, so I'm gonna dock him a couple points here. Even when their attention is fully controlled and no longer automated, that attention is still completely absorbed in their task and not in their own agency. They're not reflecting on their reflection. We hence see that it is not the presence of explicit thought that distinguishes ego-involved experience from ego-less experience. Instead, this distinction reflects the degree of immersion in activity, and so the degree to which explicit awareness of oneself is standing outside that activity is diminished. It is a distinction that is more phenomenological than psychological, having to do with how we experience our own engagement with the world, rather than how we are engaging with the world. Distinction that is more phenomenological than psychological, having to do with how we experience our own engagement with the world. When we are completely immersed in activity, whether the physical activity of carving an ox or the cognitive activity of thinking about how best to carve that ox, our sense of self, and with it the experience of the duality of subject and object in experience, vanish. There's only the experience of a flow of activity. And this is a good thing for at least two reasons. First, immersed phenomenology is less likely to lead us into the error of positing the self. That is because the subject-object duality that thematizes... one second. So there is only the experience of a flow of activity. None of this experience of self or subject and object. And that's a good thing for at least two reasons. First, immersed phenomenology is less likely to lead us into the error of positing the self. This is because the subject-object duality that thematizes the self as the subject of experience or the agent of action is itself a misleading structural superimposition on experience, a superimposition absent in immersed experience. Second, immersed phenomenology is indicative of expertise and facilitates more fluid, successful performance. Okay? So only the experience of a flow of activity, which is good because we don't make the error of positing the self, and it's more fluid, successful performance. And my goodness, I wish it wasn't. Sometimes. I mean, maybe there are advantages, and maybe I just have to find those advantages. By the way, so much to think about as we shroom this evening, bro. Or not even think about. Experience. Experience. Yeah, but sometimes I do feel so slowed down by the fact that it's like, you know what, this video is actually this is kind of like how my mind is, right? There's a part of the frame here that's this stuff here, right? And then also there's this angle and this angle of me. And that's kind of how my mental experience feels in general. It feels like there's this sort of constant feed of the subject. But it doesn't, it doesn't feel like me. It kind of looks like feels like I'm looking at me. But anyway, the point is that it's fucking distracting. But at least then God can't put a copyright claim on me, right? If that joke makes sense, sweet, good job, me. Where did I put the cameras here? Tracking mode. All right, hello. All right, so we're halfway through, and baby's still got to do the Peloton, so we've got time. So note that neither this observation, nor the story in Zhongzhi, nor the experience of great surgeons entail that non-immersed consciousness or calculative thought is always a bad thing. Okay? We're not saying that. Nobody has said that in this chapter, okay? In fact, they tell us that it is often necessary. Note that Butcher Ding acknowledges that for years he saw only oxen or the parts of the oxen. That is, that he carved oxen in a calculative rather than in an immersed way. This sounds like the dualistic mode of thought that implicates the distinction between subject and object, even though this is not how things would have been put in classical China. But it does sound like the mode of thought that implicates the distinction between subject and object. When we are learning, when we have not yet achieved expertise, or when we are teaching a skill to someone else and reflecting on it, it is often necessary to take this perspective on our activity. See, there are some advantages. This reflective, self-conscious perspective enables us to plan, to train, to monitor our own experience and actions so as to improve them. Skilled coaches direct us to monitor ourselves. Skilled coaches direct us to monitor ourselves carefully while practicing a skill for this very reason. But they encourage this kind of explicit attention with the goal that we cast off that monitoring and awareness as we become more skilled. The point is that this kind of subjectivity has its point primarily in such circumstances, and it is useful primarily because of its power to facilitate immersed experience through the development of expertise. So it's just a stepping stone. Self-consciousness is just a stepping stone to real consciousness. Okay, that's cool, bro. So self-monitoring is a special, not a general, feature of our cognition, presupposing a background of fluid engagement with the world. We are rarely aware of that omnipresent background of fluid engagement, a background necessary even for calculative, deliberate thought. We are rarely aware of that omnipresent background of fluid engagement, a background necessary even for calculative, deliberate thought. After all, to make it an object of awareness would be to kill it. To kill what? Oh, that omnipresent background of fluid engagement. But if our awareness did not implicate this background, if it was always reflective and self-conscious, we could never function. We would always be caught up in a self-conscious obsession with our own present experiences, intentions, and actions. And like the proverbial centipede who was asked to explain how he coordinates all of those legs, we could no longer walk. So I guess he's looking, hey, and then he just gets stuck. So that's me, bro. Oh yeah, that's me, bro. A self-conscious obsession. All right, so but once we draw our attention to this background dimension of our psychology, we see that it is ubiquitous. Sports psychology and the psychology of motor control more generally confirm these ideas. An ingenious study of the difference between the role of attention to a task in the process of skill acquisition, an ingenious study of the difference between the role of attention to a task, in the process of skill acquisition and in expert performance shows that when novices are learning a skill, it is very important for them to attend to their own motor performance, and that anything that distracts attention from the task at hand inhibits performance. Novices who attend carefully to their own performance do much better at tasks such as putting in golf than do those who are distracted. Self-conscious attention facilitates performance and learning. But once a skill is mastered, things change dramatically. Experts who are asked to attend to their own performance, unlike novices, do much worse than those who attend to a distractor, such as a conversation or music. And when experts choke under pressure, it is often excessive attention to themselves, in the guise either of their own performance or their own affective and cognitive states. That is the culprit. It is often excessive attention to themselves that is the culprit. This is why sports psychologists working with expert athletes often describe listening to music or some other distraction to remove attention from oneself and so to deal with this problem. It is not that experts, whether athletes or surgeons, do not pay attention to what they are doing. Indeed, everyone who studies expert performance notes that one of the important dimensions of expertise is the development of skilled attention, including both the ability to attend to the right aspects of a situation and the ability to maintain focus. To be an expert football player is to be exquisitely aware of what the other players on the field are doing, of where they are, and of where the ball is, etc. To be an expert surgeon is to be aware of countless relevant anatomical and physiological details. To be an expert typist is to be aware of what is being dictated. Expert awareness is far more highly attuned and specific than novice awareness in the same domain. The point is rather that expert awareness differs from novice awareness in at least three important respects. Okay? First, expert awareness differs from novice awareness in at least three important respects. First, it is directed principally outward at goals, not reflexively at action. Okay? So the expert, his attention's directed at goals, whereas the novice is directed at action. Okay? So that's one. This is so even though this expert awareness This is so even though this expert awareness guides action through that goal directedness. That is, the attention of the skilled batsman in cricket is on where he wants to hit the ball. The attention of the skilled surgeon is on the removal of the tumor. While the batsman's eyes are on the bowler, they shift unconsciously. They saccade with superb speed and accuracy to where the ball will strike the wicket. This is automatic. The batsman is focused on driving through covers, while the surgeon's eyes are fixed on the artery she is clamping, and while her fingers are involved in that intricate action, she is focused on the process of excision of the tumor. Second, as the story of Ding reminds us, expert consciousness is non-dual. The expert is not conscious of his or her own subjectivity and its relation to the object with which he or she is engaged, or even of the tools the expert might be using, including his or her own body. That is the kind of novice awareness that just gets in the way. Instead, the focused attention of the expert is entirely on the task at hand and on the goals to be accomplished through that task. It is immersed, embodied awareness, and awareness that is entirely fluid, adjusting to the ever-changing demands of the task at hand. Nothing resembling a self is ever present in this kind of consciousness. This is the sense in which actors or dancers, when they are successful, completely inhabit their roles, becoming the roles they embody instead of experiencing themselves as performing those roles. Finally, skilled performance typically requires a fluidity, speed, and accuracy of movement. Finally, skilled performance typically requires a fluidity, speed, and accuracy of movement, and a seamless integration of perception and action that would make such self-directed attention and deliberate planning impossible as a control mechanism. This phenomenon, to which researchers in motor control refer as automaticity, is most often studied in the context of domains such as sport or expert typing. But we should not be distracted by this fact. What goes for batting in cricket, goaltending in football, or taking dictation in an office also goes for walking, conversation, and emotional engagement with another. Oh gosh. I've got the camera on the feed. Um, so this is the sense in which actors or dancers, when they are successful, completely inhabit their roles. So, let me just mute myself real quick. Okay, so hopefully there wasn't a wardrobe malfunction visible. We'll see. We're gonna. All right, so great. Okay, so now let's apply the Taoist insights and a bit of Zen. All right, so why are these three characteristics of skilled performance so important for our purposes? Oh, right. So second, expert consciousness is non-dual. All right, great. Non-dual. And then the novice. The novice. Maybe boom. Okay, so that's 2. And then 3. Finally, skilled performance typically requires a fluidity, blah, blah, blah. Great. So novice, deliberate planning, expert, fluidity. Excellent. And that's 3. Okay. Okay. Just doing a review of the footage. Probably don't want to start on the next section until we've confirmed that all is Gucci. Okay, so but we will be applying the Taoist insights with a splash of Zen. So why are these 3 characteristics? 1, 2, 3. These 3 characteristics of skilled performance so important for our purposes? Well, for at least 2 reasons. First, we are at our best in expert performance. Expert performance reveals our most successful engagement with our world. Hello, Neuro. Expert performance reveals our most successful engagement with our world. The fact that this engagement... Actually, you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm not going to move forward. I'm going to figure out what are some things I want to contemplate on Shroom. So 1, compassion versus like my intensity. Oh, great. Excellent. With my partner. Compassion and lightness. Another thing is Garfield, dissolution of ego. But I'll probably be so focused on the dissolution of ego that it won't dissolve. Also, anxiety about that, that like this is gonna be a format, a video format, content that works. Anxiety about content creation. Anxiety about interaction with viewers. So kind of daring. I don't have any SSRIs in me. Got coffee in me. I can feel anxiety now. I may just decide to just have some whiskey this evening. I'm not sure. We'll see. But I kind of want to confront that anxiety. I want to do that with my partner. And it might be intense and it might be scary. I hope I cry. And then yeah, we'll just see what happens, bro. We will see what happens. And then maybe even you will see. I don't know if it's gonna be live, but maybe recorded and then added to my long list of videos to upload. So let's apply the Taoist insights for real now, okay? So these 3 characteristics of skilled performance, why are they important for this discussion, this investigation? So expert performance reveals, so when we're performing as experts, that's our most successful engagement with the world. That's our purest engagement. When we're just one with the objects, not doing this subject-object duality stuff. The fact that this engagement is most successful when the self-illusion is out of the picture is further evidence of the illusory status of the self. Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Excellent. You're lost about this this first paragraph. introducing this in this section? Oh, okay. Very good. All right, so the fact that this engagement is most successful when the self illusion is out of the picture is further evidence of the illusory status of the self. Because I guess if it weren't an illusion, then our most successful engagement with the world would involve this infinite regress of awareness. Why? I don't know. No, I don't understand this. The fact that such engagement takes the form of no, the fact that this engagement is no worries. The fact that this engagement is most successful when the self illusion is out of the picture is further evidence of the illusory status of the self. Is the fact that this apple is out of the picture further evidence of the illusory status of the apple? I'm sure that is a bad metaphor. It's just the problem is I don't know why. Because it just isn't necessary. Because there are so many people who have argued that like self-awareness and this subjective, direct, sort of implicit knowledge that I am a subject and I am beholding an object, that fact has been taken as used as evidence by some philosophers of the existence of the self. But I don't even think I really understood that. So maybe that's why I'm confused. So the fact that such engagement takes the form of spontaneous interaction with the environment in which we are embedded shows that experiencing ourselves as persons is our most effective mode of being. Yeah, I don't know how it shows that, but definitely, even if the self weren't an illusion, you should think of it as one. Well, not when you're learning though. But there are times when you should think of yourself or you should think of the self as an illusion. Okie dokie. Excellent job. Excellent job. There we go. Something on screen moving. Doesn't help that it's the legs of a lady. Feels so cheap and stupid to be doing this. But, bills and stuff. So, second, however, and even more important, our intimate engagement with the world requires the constant deployment of this kind of expertise, which in turn requires that we shed the self illusion in favor of attunement to the world we inhabit. So, attention to what we take to be the self and to its activities, what we take to be self awareness, has at best a limited utility, and even this explicit self-directed attention makes sense only in the context of a pervasive background of selfless attention to the world. Okay, only makes sense in the context of a pervasive background of selfless attention to the world. So even if we want to think about the self, yeah, okay, but that only makes sense in the context of a pervasive background of selfless attention to the world. Okay, great. So we deploy our everyday human expertise constantly in walking, talking, reading, engaging with friends and family, driving. The same fluidity that the Olympic gymnast exhibits on the balance beam is exhibited as we maintain our balance while walking or riding a bicycle, or when we maintain our emotional balance when engrossed in an intimate conversation. Although this fact may escape our notice, in much of our life, our sense of self is absent. And that absence, as we can now see, is a good thing. Yeah, but then anytime you look for it, that sense of self is gonna come back. Well, anytime you look for that sort of self, that sense of self is going to come back. And I compulsively sort of look for self. But so of course, anytime you go looking for it and you find it, well, you're gonna think of it as being always there. In one of his best known essays, Actualizing the Fundamental Point, Genjo Koen, the Zen philosopher Dogen, writes, okay, I have got a favor to ask of Neurome Ohm, and Baby Doll. I gotta do something about these lights, bro. This is too bright, bro. Really just blowing me. Oh, that's not the right button. Really blowing me out. That didn't help. Oh, that's interesting. How visible is that? Let's see. Hold on a second. Okay, not great. And what happens if we just turn this light on? That might be good. Might also be terrible. Alright, what if we turn this on, but just we can control the brightness? There we go. There we go. That's good. Alright, we'll do it that way. So here's the favor that I want to ask is that Neuro, can you like when you see like a moment that's good in the video, something that I could edit into a short that that people might enjoy watching, just like do a screenshot. Um, and you know what you could do? You could maybe type into the chat the time code. No, I don't know. Just do a screenshot. Just do a screenshot at least, and then send me those screenshots, and that's fine. Is this still? Oh, what if I? No, that's not gonna do it. Oh, what if I do this? No. Boop. No. All right. Well, and it's only going to get worse as it gets darker. So let's just keep it moving. Okay. So we only have like 4 more pages. Um, in one of his best-known essays, Actualizing the Fundamental Point, the Zen philosopher Dogen writes, to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. When actualized by the myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Dogen here connects the recognition of the absence of self with a kind of spontaneous engagement with reality, one that neither reifies subject and object nor consciously denies the reality of subject or object, but rather does not thematize subject and object at all. Let us consider this passage with some care. To study the self is to forget the self. That is, the more one understands one's own mode of existence, the more one understands that one is not a self. To forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. So, to understand one's selflessness is to understand not that one is non existent, but that one is a real person in constant interaction with everything else in one's environment. A causally interdependent sequence of psychophysical processes. And it is to understand that the identity we do have, our personal identity, is not achieved alone, but instead is achieved only in immersed interaction with the rest of the world we inhabit. The myriad things, the entities of the empirical world, therefore do not constitute an independent reality with which we interact, but instead constitute our reality as sub-processes of the causal unfolding of the universe. Our reality as sub-processes of the causal unfolding of the universe. Love that. Great. When actualized by the myriad things, when actualized by the myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. This kind of, hopefully you did the screenshot because this kind of spontaneous, skillful interaction in the world. I don't know what you're watching because it's not the livest of live. There's, like sometimes up to a minute of difference between what you were watching when you sent the chat and what I'm saying when I see the chat. When actualized by the myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. This kind of spontaneous, skillful interaction in the world results in the cessation of the reification of subject and object. One is not conscious of one's own body and mind as constituting a subjective pole of experience, nor is one aware of external phenomena as constituting an objective pole of experience. In spontaneous, virtuoso interaction, one simply interacts with no bifurcation of the world into subject-object or agent-action-object. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. So this is not a positive awareness of selflessness or a focus on non-dual awareness. It is simply the absence of any reification of self or dualistic consciousness, and an attitude that can become a permanent expert mode of being. Dogen, like Nagasena, is not arguing for our unreality, and he is certainly not arguing that we have no experience. He is arguing instead that our reality is that of embedded persons, not that of independent selves. He is also arguing that even though we may sometimes superimpose a dualistic structure on our experience and even take that for granted as the way we encounter the world, that duality is a superimposition on a primordially non-dual mode of awareness. While it might sometimes be useful to think in dualistic terms, to do so without awareness of the artificial cognitive origin of that structure is to fail in self-understanding, bro. All right, 2.5 pages, and then we finish Immersion. Chapter 6, and then tomorrow we'll do 7 and 8, and then on Sunday, 9 and 10, and then again on Monday, I'm going to do nothing at all. Well, I am going to have no plans, no tasks. I'm just going to lie in bed and watch TV and let some things bounce around. And then on Tuesday, while baby's at work, we're going to get ready for our interviews, which is pretty flippin' scary. So we'll add that to the things I'm going to shroom about, anxiety about these upcoming interviews. But it's absolutely fine. These are my first two. I am absolutely allowed to get it all wrong. Also, I may have already upset one of them or something by reading the book on stream. I don't know. And everything is absolutely fine. It's all just molecules and narratives. Okay, so all of this is to say that to take subject-object dualism to be a universal feature of awareness would be a serious overgeneralization. It would be to take a very special kind of cognition that is appropriate in very particular domains to be appropriate and present in all awareness. In those special moments in which we need to become aware of our own subjectivity, doing so can facilitate our engagement with the world. But in most cases, that superimposition does not render us more effective or more aware of what transpires around us. Instead, it makes us less aware of our surroundings and of the objects or others to whom we should be attending. That is, it makes us self-conscious in the pejorative sense of that term. This is why a good deal of martial arts training is dedicated to replacing calculative thought, dualistic appearance, and the thematization of self with non-dual, spontaneous, selfless performance. And we can definitely think of the implications for marriages as well when we are less self-conscious. There's also value in being self-conscious in, as he says, particular in very particular domains. Okay. So definitely, yeah, I'm thinking about my parents and how there's definitely a case for people being sort of less self-conscious and more attuned to the other person. And then there are definitely moments when it'd be valuable to be noticing how we are acting upon the world, but not as a self, to try to get some distance from it. How did that guy who was wearing this skin, or how did that woman who was wearing this skin interact 10 minutes ago? And not to evaluate that as myself, where it needs to fit into my narrative about myself, but to just pay attention with it as something that needs to fit into the relationship that we are embedded. Okay, great. So Heidegger has a nice way of putting this. He distinguishes between two different ways that the stuff of our world can show up for us in awareness. A thing may be part of my world in virtue of being ready to hand, Zuhandelheit, or it may be an object in my world in virtue of being present to hand, Vorhandenheit. When something is ready to hand, I don't notice it as an object or stand to it as subject to object. It is very much a part of my immersed action and not distinguished in awareness from me, the agent. As I am typing these words, my keyboard is like that. Like Ding's knife, it is experienced as an extension of myself, a tool that is seamlessly integrated with my thinking and my fingers. My fingers are also ready to hand. I don't think of them as objects, but rather as part of my agency. Again, reflecting the porosity of the boundary between person and environment. So porous. But suppose that something happens to my keyboard. But suppose that something happens to my keyboard. The battery may go dead or a key may stick. When that occurs, the keyboard suddenly becomes thematized as an object. It is present in my field of awareness and no longer seamlessly integrated like me, no longer seamlessly integrated with me. Like Butcher Ding, I slow down and carefully consider what I should do to fix the situation. Note that the same thing may happen to my fingers, and it often does. Tendinitis may set in. They hurt. They then cease to be a seamless part of my activity, and they are objectified, alienated from me as subject. I take them as objects of my thought as I consider what to do about them. The structure of subject-object duality emerges, on Heidegger's account, only in these situations where fluid, immersed, embedded, embodied perception and action in the world breaks down. That duality is not a pervasive aspect of our conscious lives, but a specific response to an abnormal situation. And just as in the Butcher Ding story, it does not signal the complete absence of fluid non-dual awareness or the emergence of the activity of a self, but rather a fluid non-dual engagement in a form of thought that itself projects a subject-object duality as a technique for coping with breakdown. The fact that what we can say for the keyboard, we can say as well for the fingers typing on it is also important. It is tempting to think that the fact of our embodiment means that our bodies form a kind of boundary between us and the world. That would be to infer fallaciously from the fact that we are embodied to the conclusion that we as persons are identical with our bodies, like inferring the identity of a real English actor and a fictional Danish prince from the fact that Cumberbatch is playing Hamlet. That would be to see things in terms of inner and outer, self and other, subject and object. It would therefore also be to forget that as persons we are not only embodied, but embedded. And just as our bodies can fall can fall either on the subject or the object side of our awareness. The environment beyond our bodies can do so as well. We experience this when we type, when we write, when we drive, or when we ride a bicycle. When we are immersed in action, our conscious perspective includes that of the equipment through which we engage, just as a blind person experiences her point of contact with the world at the end of a cane. Keeping this in mind helps to reinforce the idea that the imagination of the self is context specific and always a construction, not a discovery. "14 pages. All right. Keep an eye on your notifications. Maybe I will be back in 45 seconds. Thanks so much. Have a great